us go ahead and get started with the not really all that terribly important stuff. You won't like this one. Oh, my wife's not in here to not like it. Oh, there she is. Anybody? All right. In science and in advanced math, what is the symbol at the beginning? It's not so much plus as much as it is positive. Then king. So you have positive, then king. Positive, then king. Positive thinking. I said you wouldn't like it. Did not get editorial approval before I printed this one. All right. Let's go ahead and open with prayer and we'll get started today. Father, thank you so much for the day and for your goodness to us. Thank you for the many, many blessings that you've given. And Father, as we step into this new year and look ahead to what you have for us, God, help us as we study your word to look back and see what you've taught us in the past and how we can take those lessons and put them into practical application each day. Help us to learn what you have for us, Father, that we might live in a way that pleases you, and we ask this in your name, amen. All right. Last week I'd mentioned kind of tossing around between a couple things. I want to do Tabernacle, which I'd mentioned about 3-4 weeks ago that I wanted to do. Been playing around with that since October. The holiday formerly known as Columbus Day, that in my mind is still Columbus Day because that's all I know it as. When Josie was off school, we went down to the Tabernacle. We've got people in church taking a trip down there this week. I look at the Tabernacle. From there, we'll go into probably the systematic theology. We'll talk about God dwelling with man, then we'll go and study the Bible and God and the different doctrines that are there in a theology study. Becky asked me, so how long will this one take? And that's a great question. This, just taking a rough guess, we're going to go, say, 6 weeks, give or take. How much give or take? Not much give. Could be a whole lot of take. Depends on how deep you go. But I'm anticipating 6 weeks or so. And if nothing else, whet your appetite so that you can dive deeper if you so desire. The Tabernacle, kind of an interesting study as you look at it. If you've not been down to the Tabernacle reproduction in Lancaster, you need to. I've been there a whole bunch. When I was in Texas and I'd bring senior trips up this way, that was one of the stops that we'd make each year. So I've been there a whole bunch. But each time it's still something that is interesting and it helps. A phrase I've used in regards to things like sight and sound. It helps make black words on the white page get color. Now I can visualize what I've been reading. And that's one of the great benefits of, say, the Tabernacle reproduction. That you can, I've been reading this, but what does a cubit mean? Well, it's about 18. Good. But when you're reading it and you're reading it in cubits, you're not sitting there doing the math trying to figure everything out. And then you walk into the reproduction and say, well, this is bigger than I thought it was. And so it's incredibly helpful. So let's dive into the introduction. Today is just that. As you can see at the bottom there, it's just all introductory notes. Some of it about the Tabernacle, some of it about the things leading up to, or just miscellaneous thoughts. First of all, God gave explicit instructions in regards to the Tabernacle. I mean, these are the instructions you wish you had when you bought something for Christmas with assembly required. In fact, today, you buy something and there's no manual inside. You have to go online to find the steps. And then they're written and diagrammed in a way that even online you can't figure it out. God gave them very exact instructions, told them exactly what needs to happen. Nothing was left to chance. In fact, every detail was covered. He told them, this is what I want done, this is how I want it done, and these are the measurements to make sure you get it right. Think of big building projects. One of the most interesting in our lifetime was the Channel, when they built the tunnel under the English Channel. And they started from either end and met in the middle. Now think about that for a second. You don't have to be off very far for this to not work. The measurements had to be exact. We've had great disasters in our lifetime because of conversions, where one assembly team was working in metric and the other was working in standard, and they don't work well when you don't make conversions. And I don't remember what it was, if something fell or something blew up, but it was something big. I remember what the problem was. The problem was the two teams were not working with the same units. God covered every detail for these folks. But that's just how God expected the instructions he gave to be followed. How many times have we given instructions to the kids? And we covered most every detail, and it didn't matter. They did it their own way anyhow. Right down the road, we've got a very significant national park. National battlefield, but national park. And when you study Gettysburg and you see what happened, one of the big problems that was there is that Lee was used to giving instructions to Stonewall Jackson. And Lee would say something like, hey, if it's feasible, take that mountain. Well, for Stonewall Jackson, if Lee wanted it done, it was going to happen. But Stonewall Jackson had died in the previous battle. The new guy, I think it was Early, I don't remember, Lee says, hey, if it's feasible, take that. And he looked at it and said, I don't think we can do that, and just sat there. And it was a turning point in that battle. God expected his instructions. If he says, this is what I want done, he expects this is what's going to be done. He expects his instructions to be obeyed. He's not talking just to hear himself speak. There was nothing left to artistic interpretation. When God said, I want this X number of cubits long, he wanted that X number of cubits long. It wasn't a case where the designer had final, editorial approval. The designer did not have final vote of approval here. God said, I designed it, I win. This is what I want done. Now, when we're talking about the tabernacle would serve as the center of worship and sacrifice for the nation. Basically, everything would come back to that point, and we'll see that again later in the notes today. Every element within the tabernacle served a purpose. It either had a practical purpose or a symbolic purpose. More likely, it had both. It served a practical purpose for them, but it served a symbolic purpose looking ahead. Everything was there for a reason. And the tabernacle is mentioned over 300 times in Scripture. It's not just it's mentioned in Exodus and goes away after that. It's mentioned over 300 times. The first mention, we're going to get to this in just a moment here, Exodus 25:9. If you want to turn there, that's where we'll be in just a couple minutes. Its final mention is in Revelation. Last time I checked, that's toward the end of the Bible. And God talks about it there. And it's mentioned numerous times between those two passages. Well, the term tabernacle itself, different ways the term is used in the Bible, because it doesn't always refer to the tabernacle in the background here. But the tabernacle, the term itself, sometimes simply referred to a house or a dwelling place. Sometimes it referred to like a portable shrine. Sometimes it refers to the human body. It talks about our tabernacle. arms, legs, head, nose, okay, the human body. Sometimes it's simply referencing a tent. Or it might refer to the tabernacle of the congregation, the outer court area here. Now, studying the tabernacle tells us as much about God and his plan, tells us much about God and his plan and his works with man. Studying the tabernacle is incredibly beneficial for us. We don't worship at the tabernacle today. We meet, gather, and worship in a church building. And we've had this before. But it's not a what is the church as much as it is a who is the church. And so if we were to gather for an outdoor service, we would still be gathering as a church, even though we're not at a building. So it's not the physical structure that's significant, but this particular physical structure tells us a lot about our God. A lot about our God. And one of the things that we'll see here is that everything about this tabernacle is first rate. Think of the construction materials: gold, silver, and bronze, precious stones. And that doesn't go into all of the fabrics and furs that were involved. But there's a lot there, and God says it's going to be done, and it's going to be done right. I was thinking about this idea, even as I'm walking down from my car. Take the idea of good. How was dinner tonight? Well, it was good. Okay, what was wrong with it? Well, I said it was good. What more do you want? Right? And when in Genesis 1, when God's creating the earth, at the end of each day, what does he say? It was good. Was there anything wrong with it? God's definition of good is so often very, very different from our definition of good. When we're looking at the tabernacle, God's doing everything good, according to his definition. It helps us to see that our God does things right. He does things with a plan. He does things according to the plan. And he does it the right way, and he does it the right way the first time. And so we're going to take some time over these next few weeks, look at the tabernacle as kind of a springboard then, when we look ahead toward a study of theology. But the tabernacle, they had some challenges in regards to this tabernacle. Some challenges. First of all, these people who are wandering around, taking the scenic detour from Egypt to Canaan, what was their previous occupation? They were slaves. And they had been slaves for quite a while. Now, I put in the notes hundreds of years. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly where they quit being sheep herders and became slaves. It was when there was a change in dynasties in Egypt. When did that take place? In history, we could go back and get a rough idea, but we don't know that exactly. But it had been a while. As slaves, they had no money in the bank. And they had no means of making money. It wasn't like they were going to work all day building a pyramid and then go out and set up their own little, in our neighborhood, we've got a lady that puts a bake shop stand out at once a week and to make some extra money. They weren't going to be putting up a bake shop stand. They didn't have, what do we call it, a side hustle. Isn't that the term we use today? They didn't have that. They worked from sunup to sundown, ate, slept, went out and did it again. They had no money in the bank. They had no means of making money. And yet when they left, the Egyptians donated to the cause. And I've got the passage there. If you look, the Egyptians donated generously. Basically it was, please leave. Here, take what you want as you go. We want you to go. Your God is not happy with us, and that's not good. Which is important because when we get to Exodus, that's Exodus 12, when we get to Exodus 25, how do they build this if they don't have anything? Well, they had some things because God had worked all that out. So they have those challenges. Another challenge, they were on the move. They're at Sinai, Moses is getting this instruction at the top of Sinai. The people are at the bottom. When he comes down, they're not staying there forever. They're still moving toward Canaan. So they're on the move. Brianna just flew back down to South Carolina yesterday. She's got one of these new modern suitcases. It's got I think it's got 4 wheels. And 4 wheels on the bottom. And they all spin. Pretty cool. As I'm dragging it through the airport, I can spin the suitcase. My suitcase, when I went to college, had 0 wheels, and obviously they did not spin. You did not drag your suitcase, you carried your suitcase. And if you had 2 suitcases, you had 2 arms, great. If you had 3 suitcases, now you got a problem. Better figure out how to get one on the hip and the top of one suitcase and one, now you're good to go. They're on the move. And they were back in the no wheels on the suitcase age. And every time they moved, what needed to happen? Whenever they moved, they needed to pack up the tabernacle, carry it on down the road. Much of the tabernacle could go on carts, but not all of it. There was one very important piece that could not. They could carry it down the road, and when they stopped for a period of time, guess what needed to happen? Now it's time to unpack and set up the tabernacle so that you can do what when the pillar of cloud starts to move again? Pack it up and move. It needed to be portable. Not portable to our way of thinking, but to theirs. And this tabernacle was a substantial structure with sizable furniture. Again, much of it could be put on carts, but not the Ark of the Covenant. Ark of the Covenant had very strict guidelines as to how it could be moved. So if you're there, let's look at Exodus 25 and we'll read a few of these verses here. Exodus 25, beginning in verse 1, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel. I've got that mentioned. We may have seen it already. If not, it will come up again. God gives the instructions to Moses. Moses passes them along to the people. Okay? Speak unto the children of Israel, that they may bring me an offering of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, ye shall take my offering. We could stop right there and spend quite a bit of time. How is this tabernacle going to be built? The term that we use today that is obvious in that verse, the free will offering of the people. He doesn't say exact a tax and make everybody pay. He says what? Take an offering of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, ye shall take my offering. And this is the offering, this is what I want, which ye shall take of them. Gold, silver, and brass, and blue and purple and scarlet and fine linen and goat's hairs and ram skins dyed red, badger skins and shittim wood, oil for the light, spices for the anointing oil, and for sweet incense, onyx stones and stones to be set in the ephod and the breastplate, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell. Now it's interesting. God says, here are all the things I need. You get down to verse 8. Here's the why I need them. I don't know. I've never met Moses. I would be interested to know in verses 2 through 7 what's running through Moses' mind. Here's what I need. And Moses is thinking, what are we doing? What are we going to do with this? Then you get to verse 8, and this is the subtitle here. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. All of a sudden, it's not just I need an offering. We need an offering to build the house for God. This, in concept, has not happened since creation, prior to Adam and Eve in the tree, where God dwelt among them. According to all that I show thee, after the pattern of the tabernacle, after the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall ye make it. Goes back to that introduction. God gave them a plan, and he expected the plan to be followed. Now, what's happening prior to this? Prior to this tabernacle, I mentioned it, I don't know, read it, but I didn't read it off the screen here. This is a substantial structure. It's big. Okay? So prior to the tabernacle, they still had the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire to lead them. How did they get to Sinai? They followed the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. When the pillar stopped, they stopped. When the pillar moved, they moved. Prior to Sinai, there was still worship taking place. Life continued as normal. You go to a couple chapters early when we looked at the Ten Commandments. We were in this same general passage here. You go to chapter 20, what's happening prior to that? They're fighting Amalek. And so life continues. What's normal? There should be wars, rumors of wars. They had wars. Prior to the tabernacle, they had manna. Why did they have manna? Because there was grumbling and murmuring and complaining taking place. It sounds like a normal life, doesn't it? They had food. They had wars. They had grumbling and complaining. Sounds like normal humans. They had life as normal taking place. They come to Sinai. God says, all right, now it's time for all this information. And all this information is a lot of information. Generally, we think of Sinai, we talked about this with the introduction to the Ten Commandments. Generally, we talk about Sinai, we think of the Ten Commandments. There were lots of commandments that were given, not only at Sinai, but throughout the next number of years. But just at Sinai, there's a lot of commandments. We got the whole section on the tabernacle here. God initiated this project prior to the tabernacle. Well, why did they build the tabernacle? Remember, David decided, I want to build a temple. And God said, no, but your son can. But Moses didn't say, I want to build a tabernacle. God said, I want you to build a tabernacle. God initiated it. So prior to this, they've been going through life, and God says, now it's time for you to build a dwelling place for me, a sanctuary for me. God provided them the plans, and that's what starts. Look at verse 10. And they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits, and he starts with all the instructions here. God provides them with the plans. And the idea is that he's going to dwell with them. Well, what's the big point of it? The big point of it is that Israel would have a place to meet with God. It's important that God was dwelling with them, but on a practical level, it was important that Israel had a place to go to God. And as we mentioned a couple times already, the plans are given to Moses. Moses takes them to the people. Some of us have experienced, you give instructions to somebody and tell them to pass those instructions along. How often do the instructions get carried out the way you anticipated them? God ensured that this is done and done the right way. Moses is up on the top of Sinai with God. The people are down at the bottom. The message about the tabernacle is delivered to them on trip number 2. Remember, trip number 1 didn't end so well. Moses comes down and throws the tablets, and the people are involved in worshiping the idol, and goes back. Moses goes back. Okay, this is coming back down, and he gives them these plans. The first time, he may have had plans with him in his mind, but there was not a whole lot of planned discussion. It was, what's going on here? Well, let's look at some practical points about the tabernacle. This would become, and we mentioned this in the introduction, the central focal point of the nation. Everything that they do centers on this for quite some time now. It becomes the central focal point spiritually. It is the place of offering and sacrifice. And it is to be the only place of offering and sacrifice. When they get to the promised land, the final time where they're moving in, and you have some of the people staying on one bank and the rest going into the promise, remember that they build an altar on what you'd call the wrong side, and the rest of the people are like, whoa, time out, what's going on here? Because the tabernacle's over here, and this is where we worship. This was to be the place of offering and worship. It was the focal point, the center point of the tribe, the nation, physically. As they're working through the wilderness, and you can see this. You go to the reproduction, they show this. Back, I think, in the library, she had to build a model of the tabernacle for school, and so her model's back there. It's got like a sampling of all the tents. They camp all around it. In fact, when you read through this passage here, God says, I want these tribes over here and those tribes over there. God tells them exactly where they're supposed to be. Again, he covered every detail. And as they would camp, whether they camped for a week or a month, when they camped around the tabernacle. It becomes the center point, the focal point, physically. It becomes the focal point emotionally. God says, I want you to build a sanctuary that I may dwell with them. They become identified with their God. When it's time for Jericho, and the spies go into Jericho, and the spies meet with Rahab, what does Rahab tell them? We've heard of your God, and he's got us terrified. They were identified with their God who had his sanctuary in their midst. It becomes the focal point for this nation. Now, these are just some practical thoughts. Most sources would state there are 50 chapters in the scripture that are devoted to the tabernacle. Most of them, obviously, in the book of Exodus, but not all of them. There's a number of chapters in Hebrews talking about the tabernacle. And it's interesting that we mentioned here that the Egyptians donated to this cause without knowing what they were doing. God provided the resources before the people even knew there was a need. How often does God do that for you and for me? Where before we even know there's a need, God provides. He doesn't always do it that way. Sometimes he waits till we are aware of the need and think that there's no way that we can get through it, and then he says, now watch what I can do. But in this instance, God said, the Egyptians, you might want to give them some traveling money as they go. And then they get down the road and God says, take up an offering of every man that will give willingly. And there was more than enough to meet the need. God provided for them before they even knew of this. As we talk about this, the physical furnishings, the structure itself, the ceremonies that would take place within, all of this points to God's redemptive plan. Everything about it. I've got just one point mentioned here. We'll see the rest as we go through this study. You go to the tabernacle, there's one way in and out. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We get to Revelation, we see that I am the door. There's one way in and out of the tabernacle. Everything about it is focused on picturing God's work of redemption. And so this study of the tabernacle is important. It helps us to see who God is and how God operates, what God has done for us. Now, just some concluding thoughts. Let's see if it takes 15 minutes to conclude or not. Did God really need a house? I mean, think about it for a minute. God says, I want you to build a sanctuary that I may dwell. Did God really need the tabernacle? Or was the tabernacle more so that man could see who God was and what God was doing? I mean, when you think about it, the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, weren't they the symbol of God in that time for those people? They were there prior to the tabernacle. Did they really need the tabernacle? Well, no. And as we think about it, the presence of God is more important than the structure. We're here at church. God forbid that it would happen, but if the church burned down tomorrow, guess what? God is still alive and well. God and the presence of God is far more important than the physical structure. The physical structure was important, but it was important for what it represented, not because of what it was. When we look at this thoughts in general. Becky's verse, let all things be done decently and in order. You look at the tabernacle. God says, I want this done this way, and I want it done to these dimensions. He says, the offering. What did he tell him he needed? What do I need here? I need gold, silver, brass, blue, purple, scarlet, fine linen, goat's hairs, ram skin dyed red. I need badger skins, shittim wood, oil, spices, onyx stones to be set in the ephod and in the breastplate. God tells, here is what I need. In your mind, let's go back to Cain and Abel. God says, I want a sacrifice. Both brought sacrifices. One was acceptable and one wasn't. You could have had people at this point say, well, I think we're going to need that gold and silver when we get to the next Walmart, so let me see what else I've got here. Maybe I've got some nice valuable lead. I don't see lead in the list, right? They had to give what was expected, what was demanded. Let everything be done decently and in order. God says, here's what the plan is. These are the materials I need in order for this plan to be executed. Upon completion of the tabernacle, the glory of God, often referred to as the Shekinah glory, but the glory of God took residence above the Ark of the Covenant. So when this tabernacle is done, there is a visual representation of God dwelling. What did he say? I want this sanctuary that I might dwell among them. And visually, they can see this happening. We see something similar when we go to the construction of the temple, when it's concluded and Solomon has the big ceremony with prayer, and it tells us that the glory of God filled the temple. It's not the building, it's the God of the building. And we see that throughout the study of the tabernacle or of the temple. Just as God expected his instructions to be followed in regards to the tabernacle, he expects us to follow his instructions as we read through the Word. As we read and study the Bible, we see what he has for us. He expects us to obey what he tells us. I was talking to Josie the other day. I say, you need to listen. You need to listen for what's said, but you need to understand what's meant by what's said. Did you see that bus go by? I think it just ran over Josie. Because, I don't mean to throw her under the bus, but violin. If I say, go practice your violin, that's pretty obvious, right? What does that mean? It means you better get up and grab your bow and start playing. But if I would say something alike, hey, I want you to practice your violin. I want you to practice what does that mean? Or if I would say, hey, make sure this violin is practiced sometime this afternoon. Her normal question is, when? Because she wants to put it off as long as possible, right? But if I say, I want you to make sure this gets practiced, does that not carry the same weight as get up and practice the violin? How often are we the same way with God? And that's what I was thinking about. I read in the Bible and God says, this is what you need to do. When? I would never ask God. No, I just behave like I ask God when. God expects, there's a new word for you. God expects his commands to be followed, and he expects us to follow them immediately. When we're studying through the tabernacle, we believe in the doctrine, the teaching of the priesthood of the believer. There's a fantastic study that we'll spend a little bit of time with as we go through this. When you look at the priests, and there's a lot of interesting things about the priests in regards to the tabernacle. And then the last note that I have here, there's more than this, but the last note that I have here, God always provides. And we mentioned already, he doesn't always provide as expected. He doesn't always provide when we think it's needed. He doesn't always provide using the means that we would have thought probable. But he always provides. He always provides physically our needs. Sometimes my physical needs differ based upon what I think and what he thinks. But he's right. He says, with food and raiment therewith be content. He didn't say I need to have a nice new car or a big fancy house. And he didn't say the food included steak. He always provides. And he always provides in just the right time. We mentioned that even last week. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent his son at just the right time. And historically, there's a lot of, as you study it, that's kind of interesting. How at this time? Well, God provides for us at just the right time. When is this needed? God's never late. Think of Lazarus. Lazarus dies. Jesus and the disciples then show up. Oh, but if only you'd been here. Oh, but if only you knew what was about to happen. He wasn't late. He was right on time. God always provides. He provides what's needed. He provides when it's needed. He provides how it's needed. And it's not always how we think. When we study the tabernacle and we see, where did these slaves get gold, silver, brass, precious stones, fine linens? Where did these slaves get all this stuff? Because God knew what was going to be needed. And so as we study the tabernacle, as we think about all that's taking place within the tabernacle, as we look ahead toward the instruments, toward the furnishings, toward the people who were involved, there's a lot of really interesting things here. And there are a lot of sources that you can find to talk about them. Those of you who are going down to see the tabernacle this week, they don't have a big bookstore, but they've got shelves of books. And they've got things that you can look at, see, and buy. And you could lose a month's paycheck if you're not careful. Because there's a lot of resources in regards to the tabernacle. Why? Because it's fascinating, it's important, and it has a lot of lessons to teach us. We won't see all the lessons, but as we go through the next number of weeks here, hopefully we'll see some of the lessons that can help to encourage us and help us to see what God did and see the lessons about what God is doing and going to do as we go forward. So that's the introduction to the tabernacle. Father, would you guide in all that we do? I ask that you would just meet each need that we have. Father, as we study your word, help us to have hearts and minds that are open and receptive to what you have for us. God, help us have a desire to learn and take what we learn and put it into application within our lives. Accomplish your purpose in us and through us. Father, I ask you to be with the service to come. God, might you be with Pastor, give him the words to say. Father, might you be pleased with our worship, with our fellowship one with another. God, might we glorify you in all that we say and do, we ask. In your name, amen. Have a great day.